The latest addition to the CM plugins collection is a feature-packed noise gate for PC and Mac, Unfiltered Audio's G8 CM. It has all the basics covered: threshold, reduction and dry-wet mix controls, attack, hold, release envelope, hysteresis, peak and RMS modes, and up to 100 milliseconds look ahead. The real-time display can be configured to show the input and output levels graphically, as well as the action of the gate. And the analysis signal even gets its own gain fader. MIDI-wise, G8CM not only accepts note input for MIDI-controlled gating, but can also output a user-specified MIDI note whenever the gate opens. It's a highly flexible tool that everyone should have in their plugins folder, so let's take a closer look. Once the plugin is installed, fire up a new 95 BPM project in your host software of choice. Loop up breakbeat-to-gate.wav on a new audio channel, turn it down to -6 dB, then load a new instance of G8CM as an insert on this track. Hit play and you'll see that the drum loop's waveform shows up on the plugin's center display in real time, which plots decibels against time. The analysed input signal, which is the inaudible sidechain signal, is the black waveform on the center display. The red line represents the output signal after gating, which is the output signal we hear. The level of these signals can be adjusted via the two sliders on the far left and right of the plugin. You can toggle these graphs on and off in the Display Options menu. G8CM is currently analysing and displaying the breakbeat's RMS, which is akin to its average level. Switch the analysis type from RMS to peak via the drop-down menu at the plugin's top. So it's now analysing peak levels. This is ideal for analysing rapidly changing signals with sharp transients, such as drums and percussion. A noise gate shuts a signal down to silence unless it's louder than a certain level, called the threshold. Raise this slider up to around -10 dB and hear how the gate clamps down on the sections of audio that do not reach -10 dB. The horizontal threshold line on the display makes it easy to visually line the threshold value up with the desired peaks of the input signal. Watch the right gate meter as the plugin gates the breakbeat. It displays the current value of the gate envelope, turning black when the audio is let through the gate and white when it's closed over the signal, much like a gain reduction meter on a compressor. Open the Display Options drop-down and click the Show Gate tab. The thin vertical black line on the graph now represents the gate's envelope. As previously mentioned, the inaudible analysed input signal is considered separate from the outgoing signal. Its gain can be adjusted without affecting the output amplitude of the signal that you can hear. Turn the left analysis gain slider down to around -8 dB. Now only the snare and one kick of the breakbeat are allowed through the gate. Return the analysis gain to 0 dB by double-clicking on this slider. The attack and release parameters determine how quickly the gate opens and closes. pull the release down to around 20 milliseconds. Raise the attack parameter right up and note how the gate opens after the breakbeat's transients, removing the attack of each hit. Before setting attack to the minimum 1 milliseconds. The hold parameter controls the minimum amount of time the gate stays open for. Pull this down, causing the gate to close more quickly, shortening the length of each drum transient that exceeds our threshold. Note that extremely short values can cause audible glitches and clicking. We'll settle upon a value of around 40 milliseconds. Many gates allow you to set a floor, so that instead of the signal being completely silenced, it will instead be reduced in volume, effectively setting a minimum amplitude for the gate envelope. On G8 CM, this is called the reduction parameter. Turn this knob left to raise the level of the gated signal, until all of the signal is allowed through. An effect which is represented by the gate graph's raising bottom horizontal edge. Set this knob to around -13 dB. The hysteresis point can be referred to as the bottom threshold, useful to prevent the gate from repeatedly opening and closing when an audio signal is hovering around the threshold. The audio signal must drop below this bottom threshold before the gate can close, effectively setting a minimum amplitude for the gate envelope. The hysteresis point is represented by the second bottom black horizontal dotted line that emerges from the threshold line as the parameter is raised up. Set this to around -4 dB. Now hit the flip switch at the plugin's top. G8 CM is now outputting the information that the gate was previously removing, the rejected signal. So we're hearing the drum loop sustain and in-between portions. This function is really useful for extracting ambience from a loop or creating unusual grooves. Untoggle the flip switch to return to our original gated drum loop. The plugin's dry-wet knob on the bottom right can be used to blend the gated signal with the original unprocessed signal, offering a different way to manage gain. Set this to around 70%. And bypass the plugin to ABR processing with the original unprocessed loop. You can hear that we've transparently pulled down the breakbeat sustain. G8 CM can not only be triggered by the input signal, but also via an external MIDI trigger. Delete G8 CM from the drum loops channel and load a fresh instance. Set its threshold to 0 dB, attack to 1 millisecond, hold to 10 milliseconds, and release to 20 milliseconds. Create a new MIDI track and route this track's output into G8 CM's MIDI input. Refer to your DAW's manual if you're not sure how to route MIDI in your host. Play or program C3 notes on the MIDI channel, and G8 CM's red MIDI in light should flash, showing it's receiving MIDI notes. Load gate pattern.mid onto the MIDI channel we just created. G8 CM is currently listening to incoming C3 notes. And the C3 note in our example MIDI file is mirroring the same pattern as the kick. So the gate is now opening when C3 notes are triggered. Now click on the right arrow in the MIDI in section, changing the incoming note to C#3. We can now only hear the snare, as C#3 notes in the MIDI file are playing at the same time as the snare in the drum loop. Hit the right arrow to change the MIDI in note to D3, and we now hear the hi-hats of the loop. G8 CM also outputs a single MIDI note value when signal is allowed through its gate. The left and right arrows in the MIDI out section allow you to set which MIDI note the gate plugin will output. Change the MIDI in note to C3 to isolate the kick again. Then load pad2gate.wav on a second audio track. And then duplicate the first track's G8 CM instance onto the pads channel. Create a blank MIDI track and place it between these two audio tracks. Then use this channel to route the first G8 CM instance's MIDI out signal into the second G8 CM's MIDI in. The gate over the pad is only letting signal through whenever a kick hits. A useful creative effect. Toggle the flip button to hear the inverse signal, causing the pad's gate to be opened in between each kick for a pumping style effect. If you're a fan of G8 CM, make sure you check out the full version, Unfiltered Audio's G8 Dynamic Gate. You can take a further look at www.unfilteredaudio.com.
Download over 30 exclusive plugins. Get hundreds of pro-quality samples and power up your production skills with in-depth tutorials. We break it down for you step by step, and you'll see exactly how it's done in expert video guides and producer masterclass sessions with pro producers. Get all this and more with Computer Music Magazine every month on iPad and iPhone, PC and Mac, Android, and in print.